Hello, this is Miss Smith, and I'm here to teach you about Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement. So, Jamestown was a colony in Virginia, and why was it significant or important? It was significant because a few different reasons. First of all, Jamestown was established in Virginia in the year 1607. In eighth grade, there are about 5 or 6 different important years that you need to know. 1607 is the very first one. So, 1607, get it in your brain, download it. 1607 is important because it's the year Jamestown was established. And like you see here on 1C, Jamestown was the first permanent English settlement. There was actually a settlement before Jamestown called Roanoke. Roanoke was also in Virginia. However, Roanoke was not successful. Roanoke was not permanent. The settlers at Roanoke, there are 2 theories about what happened to them. One, either they just ran away and they disappeared, or 2, they were killed by the natives. So all that was left behind was the word Croatoan was carved into the tree. So Roanoke, not a viable colony, not permanent in the way that Jamestown was. So Jamestown, 1607, first permanent English settlement, unlike Roanoke 20 years prior in 1587. So Jamestown, like you will read about in the background essay, was financed by a group of investors called the Virginia Company of London. So basically, you had a group of people who paid for the settlers to go to Jamestown. What were the people who went to Jamestown like? They were gentlemen. So they were basically wealthy men who were not accustomed to, or they were not used to, physical labor, which that proved to be very problematic during that first winter and even the first fall, when it comes time to do work and it comes time to getting out in those fields and planting and harvesting crops. That's why they almost starved to death. So that wasn't a good look. So they had gentlemen, that was one group of individuals. They also had indentured servants and skilled workers. So indentured servants are essentially people who got to go to the New World for free, but the trade-off was that whoever they traveled with, it was usually a family, they had to work for them for a fixed period of time. So it could have been 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. And once that time was up, then they were a free person. So that's different from slavery, because with slavery, you are working for someone as their servant, but it's for life. There's not like, okay, after 5 years, bye, go live your life. No. That's forever, right? An indentured servant was only for a certain amount of time. It was basically like you're paying off your debt. Once your debt is paid, then you're good to go. The colonists, for the most part, were religious, but their main motive was getting rich. They wanted to find gold. So the purpose for establishing Jamestown was not religious. It was purely economic. So what was the actual settlement like? They were in Virginia. It was swampy. It was hot. It was humid. There are lots of mosquitoes. And the unsanitary conditions and the mosquitoes that I just mentioned caused diseases to spread, which was not good. They also had issues with their leadership. They didn't have like a really strong leader until later on. And they were very, by and large, unmotivated. So John Smith, you might have heard of him if you've ever seen that Pocahontas movie. It was one of my favorites growing up. He came up with this rule: if you don't work, you don't eat. So that was really important because you had all these gentlemen who didn't want to get their hands dirty, and you have this no-nonsense, take-charge leader in John Smith who comes along and he says, look, if y'all don't work, then you're not going to get to eat because we're starving. People are dropping like flies, and something's got to change. And that was one of the turning points in the history of Jamestown. So the starving time, that was what the time period was known as when they had a crop failure because of the heat. Remember, I said it was very hot and humid due to their location. And they were very dependent on the natives for survival. So while the movie Pocahontas was fictionalized, there were some elements that were true. They did depend on the Native Americans because they knew the land very well, and the English, they didn't know. Um, they did have clashes with the Native Americans. Like I mentioned last week, we talked about how the English didn't get along very well with the natives, and this is one of those instances. But just like on the movie Pocahontas, you might remember if you've ever seen it, and she was a real person. She wasn't just a Disney character. So, what was known as the Peace of Pocahontas was brought about after she married John Rolfe, who was an Englishman, and he actually is credited with helping to save the Jamestown colony because he smuggled in some tobacco seeds, and tobacco was the crop, believe it or not, that actually revitalized Jamestown. Jamestown was on the struggle bus, even though they didn't have cars then. If there was a struggle bus, Jamestown was putting the pedal to the metal. They were a hot mess express. But tobacco was like the perfect crop for this climate, right? He brought it from the islands. The islands, very tropical, very similar climate to what they were experiencing in Virginia. So, tobacco, it thrives, it does well. It's the cash crop that saves Jamestown. John Rolfe, he's a jolly good fellow. He's a hero. So that is how Jamestown came to be the first permanent English settlement. They survived the starving time. They survived disease. They survived their clashes with Native Americans. And they were able to find a cash crop that survived and thrived in, the climate that they were dealing with. So key takeaways in terms that you need to know. 1607, you need to know that 1607 is the year that Jamestown, which was the first permanent English settlement, was established in Virginia. I've already explained this over and over during our live sessions and also in other videos as well. A cash crop, it has a fancy definition here. Mine is take it for face value. A cash crop is a crop that you sell for cash. You want to profit off of this crop. An indentured servant, I just explained that. It has a fancy definition there. An indentured servant is someone who's like, I want to go to America real bad. I'll work for you for 5 to 7 years. Deal. And I already explained who these lovely people are. John Smith, he was the leader of Jamestown. He said, if you don't work, you don't eat. Pocahontas, she was actually the daughter of the Powhatan chief. On the movie, his name was Powhatan, if you were a Pocahontas fan like myself. And she is credited with helping save the Jamestown colony and community. She also married John Rolfe, and they moved back to England, or they moved to England. She didn't go back because she was a Native American. And John Rolfe, he was the colonist, the settler who helped to, introduce tobacco to Jamestown, credited with saving the flailing, struggling colony, and later went on to marry Pocahontas. So now you know about Jamestown and the first permanent English settlement in the New World.